Hey, welcome to Greenwell, the spot for wild stories, big twists, and a touch of sweet revenge. Love surprises and a good laugh? Well, hit the subscribe button, jump right in, and get ready for awesome characters, fun dramas, and endings you'll remember. Tap the bell and let's get started.
Sorry, man, but you crossed the line.
The key turned halfway and stopped. Eric Landon jiggled it, twisted harder, then stepped back from his own front door like it had bitten him. After 16 hours operating a concrete mixer in 90-degree heat, his brain needed a moment to process what his hands already knew. Someone had changed his locks. The porch light flickered against the humid August evening, casting shadows across the welcome mat Dana had picked out 3 years ago. Their wedding photo smiled at him through the front window, but something felt wrong about the house itself. Too quiet, too clean, like someone had scrubbed away any trace of him living there. Eric checked his phone. No missed calls, no texts. Dana should be home from her job at TechFlow Solutions by now, probably watching her cooking shows with a glass of wine. He walked around to the back door, work boots heavy on the concrete path he'd poured himself last spring. That key didn't work either. What the hell? He cupped his hands against the kitchen window. The dining room table was set for two, candles lit, wine glasses filled. Dana sat across from a man Eric recognized but couldn't immediately place. They were laughing about something, completely relaxed. Then the man leaned forward and kissed his wife. Eric's first instinct was to punch through the glass. His second was to kick down the door. Instead, he pulled out his phone and called Dana's number. Through the window, he watched her check the screen and decline the call without even showing it to her dinner companion. The man said something that made Dana throw her head back and laugh harder. That's when Eric remembered where he knew the face. Trent Gallo. His former supervisor at Morrison Construction, the guy who'd fired Eric 3 months ago over what Trent called attitude problems and failure to follow safety protocols. The same Trent who'd thrown the first punch in the parking lot argument that got Eric blacklisted from half the construction companies in town. Now Trent was sitting in Eric's kitchen, eating off Eric's plates and sticking his tongue down Eric's wife's throat. Eric tried the front door again, then hammered on it with his fist. "Dana, open up!" The dining room went silent. Through a gap in the curtains, Eric saw Dana whisper something to Trent, who nodded and disappeared toward the back of the house. A moment later, the porch light went out. "I know you're in there!" Eric's voice echoed down the street. Mrs. Patterson next door peeked through her blinds, then quickly pulled them shut. The Kowalskis across the street turned off their porch light too. Eric was still pounding on the door when the police cruiser pulled up. Officer Hayes climbed out slowly, hand resting on his belt. Eric had seen him around town, but never spoken to him directly. Hayes looked like the kind of cop who'd played football in high school and never quite gotten over it. "Sir, I need you to step away from the door." "This is my house." Eric's voice came out rougher than he intended. "My name's on the deed. I live here. Do you have identification?" Eric pulled out his wallet, hands shaking with rage and confusion. Hayes examined his license under a flashlight, comparing it to something on his clipboard. "Sir, I have a report of harassment and threatening behavior. The residents have requested that you leave the property." "Residents? My wife is the only resident, and she's in there with some guy who shouldn't be." Hayes stepped closer, and Eric caught a whiff of coffee and aftershave. "Sir, I need you to calm down and step away from the property. If you refuse, I'll have to arrest you for trespassing." "Trespassing? I pay the mortgage on this place." "Sir, last warning. Step away from the door and walk to your vehicle." Eric looked back at the house. The curtains were drawn tight now, but he could see shadows moving behind them. Two figures standing close together, watching him get humiliated on his own front porch. "Fine." Eric backed toward his pickup truck, hands raised. "But this isn't over. It is for tonight. Don't come back until you've sorted this out through proper legal channels." Hayes waited until Eric started his engine before getting back in the cruiser. As Eric drove away, he saw the porch light flick back on, and the front curtains part slightly. Dana's silhouette appeared in the window, watching him leave. Eric drove to the Sunset Motel on Route 47, paid cash for a room that smelled like disinfectant and cigarettes, and sat on the sagging bed trying to make sense of what had just happened. His phone buzzed. A text from Dana. "Don't try to come back tonight. We'll talk tomorrow when you're calmer." "We'll talk." Like he was some angry drunk who'd embarrassed himself at a party. Like finding your wife with another man in your own house was just a misunderstanding that could be cleared up over coffee. Eric typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on something simple. How long? The reply came back immediately. Does it matter? Yes, it mattered. It mattered whether this was a recent mistake or a long-term betrayal. It mattered whether Dana had been lying to his face for weeks or months. It mattered whether every working late and girls' night out and headache not tonight had been part of an elaborate deception. But Eric didn't text back. Instead, he opened his laptop and logged into their joint checking account. Balance: $1,247.32. 3 days ago, there had been nearly $18,000 in that account. Eric's savings from 6 months of overtime, Dana's annual bonus, and the insurance payout from Eric's father's funeral. Money they'd been saving for the down payment on a bigger house. Eric checked the transaction history. Yesterday morning, electronic transfer to account hash 4,471, $16,753, authorized by D. Landon. He clicked through to their savings account. Also empty. The safety deposit box rental had been canceled. Even their shared credit card showed a zero balance after what looked like a deliberately calculated payoff. Eric stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. Dana hadn't just been cheating. She'd been planning. This wasn't passion or impulse or a moment of weakness. This was financial warfare. His phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Eric Landon? Yeah. This is Detective Malley with the city police. I understand you had an incident at your residence tonight. Eric sat up straighter. If you want to call finding my wife with another man an incident, sure. I need you to understand something, Mr. Landon. There has been a complaint filed against you for stalking and harassment. The complainant has provided evidence of threatening communications and unwanted contact. What evidence? I haven't threatened anyone. Text messages, voicemails, photographs taken without consent. Do any of those ring a bell? Eric's chest tightened. No, none of that happened. I'm going to be very clear with you, Mr. Landon. You're to have no contact with Dana Landon or Trent Gallo. No calls, no texts, no visits to their workplace or residence. If you violate this warning, you'll be arrested. Do you understand? Their residence, not his residence. Their residence. I understand. Good. I suggest you find yourself a lawyer and a new place to stay. Have a good evening. The line went dead. Eric set the phone down carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter what was left of his sanity. Someone knocked on the motel room door. Eric looked through the peephole. A teenage kid in a delivery uniform stood under the flickering neon sign, holding a manila envelope. Eric Landon? That's me. The kid handed over the envelope and walked away without another word. Eric tore it open. Inside, a restraining order dated today, 3 photos of him apparently taking pictures of Dana's car in the TechFlow parking lot, and printouts of text messages he'd never sent. The photos showed a man who looked like Eric, wearing clothes Eric owned, standing behind a telephoto camera lens. The text messages were from his phone number to Dana's, full of jealous accusations and vague threats. But Eric had never sent them, never taken those photos, never owned a camera with a lens like that. Someone had been impersonating him for long enough to build a legal case. Eric grabbed his truck keys and drove to Morrison Construction, where he'd worked for 8 years before Trent fired him. The night security guard, Jimmy Roscoe, waved from the booth. Eric, thought you were working for Peterson now. Not anymore. Listen, Jimmy, I need to ask you something. Has Trent been around here after hours lately? Maybe with someone. Jimmy glanced around, then leaned closer. Hell yes. Been here 3-4 nights a week for the past month. Always with that lady from the tech company. Pretty brunette. Drives the white Lexus. Dana. That her name? Yeah, they've been using the conference room a lot. Trent said they were working on some kind of partnership deal. Partnership deal? Eric almost laughed. Jimmy, did you ever see them taking pictures? Maybe of paperwork or using the computer? Now that you mention it, yeah. Last week I saw them scanning a bunch of stuff. Trent said it was contract documents, but it looked like personal papers to me. Photos and letters and such. Eric thanked Jimmy and drove back to the motel. In the parking lot, he sat in his truck and tried to piece together the timeline. Dana and Trent had been meeting for at least a month, using Morrison's office equipment to build their case against him. They'd forged text messages, staged photographs, emptied his bank accounts, and filed legal papers to have him removed from his own life. This wasn't an affair that had spiraled out of control. This was a calculated campaign to erase Eric Landon from existence. Eric's phone buzzed. A photo message from an unknown number. The image showed Dana and Trent in bed together. Dana was laughing at something off camera, and Trent was holding up a piece of paper toward the photographer. Eric zoomed in on the paper. It was his social security card. The message that followed was brief. Found this in your old work locker. Thought you might want it back. A friend. Eric stared at the photo until his hands started shaking. Someone else knew what Dana and Trent were doing. Someone had access to their private moments. Someone was documenting their crimes. But who? And why were they helping him? Eric called the number. It went straight to voicemail with no greeting, just a beep. I don't know who you are, but thank you. If you have more evidence like this, I need it. He hung up and waited. Within minutes, his phone chimed again. This time, it was a video file. The footage showed Trent and Detective Malley in a parking garage, shaking hands over what looked like a thick envelope. Audio was clear enough to hear Malley say, "He won't be a problem after tomorrow." Eric's blood went cold. The police weren't neutral in this. They were part of the conspiracy. But now Eric had proof. The next morning, Eric woke up in the motel room with a plan forming in his head. Dana and Trent thought they'd isolated him, neutralized him, reduced him to a powerless victim. They'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated him. Eric had spent 20 years in construction, but before that, he'd served 4 years in the Army and 2 years learning surveillance techniques from his Uncle Ray, who'd worked private security for casino companies. Eric knew how to disappear when he needed to, how to watch people without being seen, and how to find information that others tried to hide. More importantly, Eric knew how to be patient. He drove to Peterson Construction, where his former co-worker, Jake Williams, ran a crew. Eric heard about the situation, man. Sorry. Jake, I need to ask a favor. Can you get me into Morrison's office after hours? I need to retrieve some personal property. Jake studied Eric's face. They'd worked together for 6 years, and Jake knew Eric wasn't the kind of man who made frivolous requests. What kind of personal property? The kind that proves I didn't send those text messages or take those photos? Jake nodded slowly. Trent's got security codes for the whole building. If someone was using company equipment to frame you, there'd be digital evidence on the servers. Can you get me in or not? Saturday night, cleaning crew goes home at 10. Security doesn't do rounds until midnight. Eric spent the rest of the week preparing. He bought a digital camera, a voice recorder, and a laptop computer with cash from his emergency fund. He studied Dana's schedule, noting when she left for work, when she returned, and which route she took through downtown. On Friday, he followed Trent from Morrison Construction to a gym on the east side of town. Eric waited in the parking lot until Trent emerged 2 hours later, then followed him to a bar called Mickey's Tavern. Inside, Eric ordered a beer and sat at the bar where he could watch Trent's table in the mirror. Trent was meeting with 2 other men Eric didn't recognize. All 3 wore expensive clothes and had the smooth, predatory look of men who made their living taking advantage of others. Eric activated the voice recorder on his phone and moved to a table closer to Trent's group. "Oh, final payment next week," one of the strangers was saying. "After that, your boy's completely out of the picture." "He's not my boy," Trent replied. "He's a loose end that needed to be tied up." "Well, your loose end cost us 40 grand in legal fees and bribes. Make sure he stays gone." Trent raised his beer. "To new partnerships." Eric left Mickey's Tavern with a head full of questions and a phone full of audio evidence. Whatever Trent was involved in went beyond stealing Eric's wife and house. There was serious money changing hands, and Eric's removal had been a business expense. Saturday night, Eric met Jake at the Morrison Construction gate. "You sure about this, man? If we get caught, I lose my job." "I'm sure." Jake led Eric through the building to Trent's office. While Jake kept watch, Eric powered up Trent's computer and inserted a USB drive. The password was Danagallo1. Apparently, Trent wasn't concerned about operational security. Eric copied Trent's entire email folder, his photo directory, and his browser history. Then he accessed the company's document scanner logs and found records of over 200 scans performed by Trent's user account in the past month, most of them after hours. The scanned documents were still stored on the server. Eric opened the first few and felt his anger crystallize into something harder and more focused. Dana's employment records, showing she'd been fired from her previous job for falsifying harassment claims. Medical records indicating Dana had been prescribed anti-anxiety medication for situational stress related to marital deception. Bank statements from an account Eric had never known existed. containing nearly $60,000 in unexplained deposits, and photographs. Dozens of photographs of Eric taken without his knowledge over the past 6 months. Eric at work sites, Eric buying groceries, Eric visiting his father's grave. Someone had been documenting his entire life in preparation for this moment. But the most damaging evidence was in Trent's email correspondence with someone identified only as LR. Target has been successfully isolated from employment and social support networks. Financial assets transferred per your instructions. Legal documentation filed. Recommend proceeding to Phase 3. Phase 3. Eric scrolled down to find more details. Phase 3. Complete social and psychological breakdown. Target should be arrested within 72 hours on manufactured charges. Recommend escalating to physical confrontation if necessary. Payment schedule: $25,000 upon arrest, additional $50,000 upon conviction. Someone was paying Trent $75,000 to destroy Eric's life. This wasn't about Dana's affair or workplace grudges. Eric had been targeted by professionals. Eric copied everything to his USB drive and erased the access logs. As Jake locked up the building, Eric was already planning his next move. Find what you needed? Jake asked. More than I expected. Eric spent Sunday organizing the evidence and researching the names and phone numbers he'd found in Trent's files. LR turned out to be Laura Richter, Dana's older sister, who worked as a litigation consultant for a firm that specialized in asset recovery for divorce cases. The picture became clearer. Laura had hired Trent to systematically dismantle Eric's life so that Dana could divorce him and claim the house, the savings, and everything else without having to split anything with Eric. The affair was just the emotional cover for what was essentially a financial crime. But Laura had made the same mistake as Dana and Trent. She'd underestimated Eric. Eric drove to the cemetery where his father was buried and sat beside the headstone for an hour thinking. His father had been a union organizer who'd faced down company thugs and corrupt officials for 30 years. He'd taught Eric that sometimes the system was rigged, and sometimes you had to work outside the system to get justice. They think they've got me beat, Pop, but they don't know who they're dealing with. Eric's phone rang. The unknown number from before. Hello? You've been busy? The voice was electronically disguised, but Eric could tell it was a woman. Who is this? Someone who has a reason to want Trent Gallo destroyed. I've been watching him for months. Why? He did to my brother what he's trying to do to you, except my brother didn't survive it. Eric felt a chill. What do you mean? Trent specializes in isolation campaigns. He identifies targets with assets worth stealing, then systematically destroys their support networks until they're vulnerable. My brother killed himself rather than face the false charges Trent manufactured? Jesus. I've been gathering evidence against Trent for 2 years. When I saw him targeting you, I decided to intervene. So, you're my mysterious friend with the photographs. Among other things, Eric, these people are dangerous. They've done this before and they're very good at it. If you try to fight them through official channels, you'll lose. Eric looked at his father's headstone. Then we don't use official channels. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Because once we start, there's no going back. Eric thought about Dana laughing with Trent in their kitchen, about waking up homeless and penniless while his wife and her lover spent his savings, about Detective Malley threatening him while taking bribes, about Phase 3 and manufactured charges and $75,000 changing hands for his destruction. I'm sure. Then meet me tomorrow night. Riverside Park near the old boat ramp. Come alone. The line went dead. Eric sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the wind move through the oak trees around his father's grave. Tomorrow, his real education would begin. Monday evening, Eric arrived at Riverside Park an hour early and positioned himself where he could watch the boat ramp from cover. At exactly 9 o'clock, a woman approached the meeting spot. She was in her 30s, athletic build, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She moved like someone with military or law enforcement training. Eric emerged from the trees. I'm Eric. Kelly! She studied his face. You look like hell. I feel worse. Kelly handed Eric a thick manila folder. Everything you need to know about Trent Gallo's operation. Financial records, victim profiles, correspondence with his handlers. Your wife isn't his first target, and she won't be his last. Eric opened the folder. The first document was a psychological profile of Dana, noting her susceptibility to manipulation and willingness to rationalize harmful behavior. The second was a timeline of Trent's approach, showing how he'd cultivated Dana's friendship over 8 months before suggesting the affair. This is incredible. How did you get all this? I have my methods. The important thing is what you do with it. Eric flipped through bank statements showing payments to Trent from something called Richter Consulting Solutions, Laura's company. Why haven't you taken this to the police? Kelly laughed bitterly. Half the police department is on Trent's payroll. The other half wouldn't believe it. Rich people don't go to jail for financial crimes in this town, Eric. They pay fines and hire better lawyers. So, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we give Trent and your wife exactly what they deserve. But we do it smart, and we do it so thoroughly that they never recover. Eric looked across the dark river. What did you have in mind? Kelly smiled, and Eric saw something predatory in her expression. We turn their own system against them. Every lie they've told, every crime they've committed, every vulnerability they've created, we use it all. Over the next 2 hours, Kelly outlined a plan that was elegant in its brutality. Phase 1, document everything. Phase 2, divide and conquer. Phase 3, total destruction. The beauty of their approach, Kelly explained, is that they've made themselves completely dependent on secrecy and cooperation. If we can break either one, the whole thing collapses. Eric walked back to his truck with the folder under his arm and Kelly's phone number programmed into his cell. For the first time since Friday night, he felt something other than rage and confusion. He felt hope. Tuesday morning, Eric started his new career as a professional investigator. Using Kelly's intelligence and his own construction industry connections, he began building a comprehensive picture of Trent's criminal network. Trent's operation was more sophisticated than Eric had imagined. He worked with a team of lawyers, private investigators, corrupt cops, and what Kelly called social engineers. People skilled at manipulation and deception. They targeted men with significant assets who were vulnerable to isolation, recent widowers, men with strained family relationships, anyone who might not be missed immediately if they disappeared. The process was always the same. First, they'd identify a target through public records and social media. Then they'd insert someone into the target's life, usually an attractive woman who'd begin an affair with the target's wife or girlfriend. While the target was distracted by relationship drama, the team would systematically destroy his financial and social support networks. Finally, they'd manufacture criminal charges, often involving domestic violence or sexual assault, that would result in the target's imprisonment. With the target unable to defend himself, his assets could be transferred to the conspirators without legal challenge. Eric was horrified to discover that the scheme had been operating for at least 5 years. Kelly showed him newspaper articles about 7 different men who'd been arrested on similar charges, all represented by the same law firm, all sentenced by the same judge, all divorced by wives who'd recently retained Richter Consulting Solutions. 2 of the men had committed suicide in prison. 3 others had died under suspicious circumstances after their release. My brother was number 6, Kelly said when they met Wednesday night. You would have been number 8. What happened to number 7? That's where it gets interesting. Number 7 was a guy named Paul Morrison. Ring any bells? Eric's blood went cold. Morrison Construction. That's Trent's company. Was Trent's company. Paul Morrison was the original owner. Trent was just a supervisor until last year. Jesus Christ, Trent stole the entire business? Lock, stock, and barrel. Morrison's wife filed for divorce, claiming abuse. Morrison was arrested on manufactured domestic violence charges. While he was in jail awaiting trial, his wife transferred ownership of the company to Trent as payment for consulting services. Eric stared at Kelly. Where's Morrison now? Officially? He committed suicide in his cell 3 months ago. Unofficially? Let's just say I have my doubts about the official story. Eric felt like he was looking into an abyss. These weren't just criminals. They were serial killers who used the legal system as their weapon. Kelly, if we go after these people and lose, we're dead. If we don't go after them, you're dead anyway. They've invested too much in destroying you to just walk away. Eric knew she was right. Phase 3 was still coming, and when it arrived, he'd either be ready for it or he'd end up like Paul Morrison. What do we do first? Kelly smiled. We start with Detective Malley. Thursday afternoon, Eric followed Detective Malley from the police station to a strip mall on the south side of town. Malley went into a pawn shop called Second Chance Jewelry and emerged 20 minutes later, carrying a small paper bag. Eric waited until Malley left, then entered the pawn shop. Behind the counter stood a nervous-looking man in his 50s with thinning hair and thick glasses. Help you? Eric placed a $100 bill on the counter. I'm looking for information about the cop who was just in here. The man's eyes darted toward the door. I don't know what you're talking about. Eric added another 100. I'm not a cop. I'm not wearing a wire. I just need to know what Detective Malley bought from you. The man hesitated, then swept the money into his cash drawer. Burner phone, buys one every week, sometimes two. Same model? Always the same. Cheap, prepaid, untraceable. Eric thanked the man and left. Outside, he called Kelly. Malley's buying burner phones every week. That means he's coordinating with people he doesn't want connected to his official phone records. Perfect. Can you follow him tonight? Already planning on it. At 7 o'clock, Eric watched Malley leave his house and drive to a warehouse district near the river. Malley parked behind an abandoned textile factory and walked to a loading dock where two other men were waiting. Eric crept close enough to hear the conversation while recording it on his phone. Getting nervous, one of the strangers was saying. This Landon guy isn't breaking down like the others. He will, Malley replied. Give it another week. A week? The client wants this finished. If phase 3 doesn't happen soon, she's going to find someone else to handle it. The client can wait. I'm not moving until everything's in place. What if Landon tries to fight back? Malley laughed. With what? We've got him isolated, broke, and facing criminal charges. He's got nowhere to run and no one to help him. Eric felt a surge of satisfaction. They had no idea Kelly existed, no idea he'd found their evidence, no idea he was listening to every word they said. After the meeting ended, Eric followed the two strangers to a luxury apartment complex downtown. Through binoculars, he watched them enter a penthouse unit registered to L. Richter Consulting. Laura's place. Eric photographed the license plates of all three vehicles, then drove back to his motel room to plan his next move. Friday morning, Kelly called with news. I've been monitoring Trent's communications. He's planning something for this weekend. Big meeting at your old house, lots of people involved. What kind of meeting? The kind where they finalize phase 3. Eric, I think they're going to try to plant evidence at your motel room. Drugs, weapons, something that will justify a search warrant and arrest. Eric's stomach dropped. When? Tomorrow night. But here's the interesting part. Dana's having second thoughts. What do you mean? I intercepted some text messages between her and Laura. Dana's starting to realize this whole thing has gone too far. She never signed up for destroying your life completely, just getting out of the marriage with the assets. Eric felt a spark of something that might have been hope. So she might be willing to cooperate? Or she might warn Trent that you're onto them. We need to move fast. Kelly was right. Eric had spent a week gathering intelligence, but intelligence was only useful if you acted on it. What's the plan? We split them up and turn them against each other. Dana's the weak link. She's motivated by emotion, not money. If we can convince her that Trent's using her, she'll flip. And if she doesn't? Then we destroy them all and let God sort it out. Saturday evening, Eric positioned himself across the street from his old house and watched cars arrive for Trent's meeting. He recognized Detective Malley's cruiser, Laura's BMW, and 3 other vehicles he'd seen at the warehouse. Through the living room window, Eric could see 8 people seated around his dining room table, reviewing documents and passing around photographs. His life was being dissected and disposed of by committee. But Eric wasn't the helpless victim they thought he was anymore. At exactly 9 o'clock, Eric's phone rang. Kelly's voice was tight with tension. Eric, we have a problem. I just intercepted a police radio call. They're sending units to your motel room right now with a search warrant. Already? I thought you said tomorrow night. They moved up the timeline. Someone's getting nervous. Eric started his truck. Where do I go? My apartment. I'll text you the address. And Eric, bring everything. We're going into the final phase tonight. Eric drove to the motel and watched from the parking lot as 3 police cruisers surrounded his room. Officers emerged with evidence bags, clearly planting whatever they'd brought with them. If Eric had been sleeping in that room tonight, he'd be in handcuffs by now. Kelly's apartment was in a converted warehouse on the east side of town. She met Eric at the door with a grim expression. It's worse than we thought. They're not just framing you for possession. They're setting you up for attempted murder. What? Kelly led Eric to a bank of computer monitors showing feeds from hidden cameras. I've been monitoring their communications all week. Trent convinced Dana to sign a statement claiming you threatened to kill her. Combined with the planted evidence and your erratic behavior, it gives them everything they need for a life sentence. Eric stared at the monitors, feeling the walls close in around him. So what now? Now we give them exactly what they're expecting, but not the way they're expecting it. Kelly handed Eric a cell phone and a small recording device. You're going to call Dana and arrange to meet her, but instead of the emotional confrontation they're expecting, you're going to be completely calm and rational. I don't understand. Dana's expecting you to act like a crazy, jealous husband. When you don't, she'll be off balance. That's when we spring the trap. Eric looked at the phone. What if she doesn't answer? She'll answer. She needs to hear your voice to convince herself she's making the right choice. Eric dialed Dana's number. She picked up on the first ring. Eric, where are you? Somewhere safe. We need to talk. I don't think that's a good idea. Dana, I know about Laura. I know about the money. I know about all of it. Silence. Then, I don't know what you mean. $75,000, Dana. That's what Trent's getting paid to destroy me. How much is your cut? More silence. When Dana spoke again, her voice was shaky. Meet me at Riverside Park in an hour. The old boat ramp. I'll be there. Eric hung up and looked at Kelly. You think she'll come alone? No, but that's okay. We're not planning to be there either. Kelly handed Eric a small electronic device. GPS tracker. While you're talking to Dana, I'll be planting this on Trent's car. When they think they've got you cornered, we'll know exactly where they are. And then we give the FBI everything we've collected and let them sort it out. The FBI? Kelly smiled. Eric, this is a multi-state conspiracy involving mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, bribery, and at least 2 suspicious deaths. The local cops might be corrupt, but the feds aren't going to ignore this. Eric felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. All this time, he'd been thinking like a victim instead of thinking like a citizen with rights and resources. You already contacted them? 3 days ago. Agent Sarah Chen has been very interested in our evidence. She's been investigating similar schemes in 3 other states. Eric laughed for the first time in a week. So, when Dana and Trent show up at the park tonight, they're going to walk into a federal sting operation. At 10:30, Eric watched from Kelly's surveillance van as Dana arrived at Riverside Park. She was alone, but Eric could see Trent's car parked a quarter-mile away with a clear view of the meeting spot. Dana looked nervous, checking her phone every few seconds and glancing around the dark park like she expected danger from every shadow. At exactly 11 o'clock, FBI agents emerged from concealment and surrounded both Dana and Trent's positions simultaneously. Eric watched on Kelly's monitors as Agent Chen approached Dana with her badge out and her weapon holstered. Dana Landon, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud. Through the long-range microphones Kelly had planted, Eric heard every word of Dana's confession. She broke down immediately, sobbing about how Trent had manipulated her, how she'd never intended for things to go so far, how she just wanted out of her marriage without losing everything. Trent was less cooperative. He demanded a lawyer and refused to answer questions. But it didn't matter. Kelly and Eric had enough evidence to bury him 10 times over. At midnight, Eric's phone rang. Agent Chen. Mr. Landon, we're going to need you to come in and give a formal statement. But I wanted you to know, we've arrested 6 people tonight, including Detective Malley and Laura Richter. This conspiracy is finished. Eric looked at Kelly, who was monitoring police radio chatter on her scanner. What happens now? Now you get your life back, Kelly said. Your bank accounts will be unfrozen, the restraining order will be dismissed, and you'll probably get your house back after the civil suits are settled. Eric thought about that house, about the memories he'd made there with Dana, about the future they'd planned together. It all seemed like a lifetime ago. I'm not sure I want it back. Kelly looked at him with understanding. Sometimes the best revenge is just walking away and building something better. 3 months later, Eric stood in the lobby of the federal courthouse, watching Dana's sentencing hearing through a glass partition. She'd pleaded guilty to conspiracy charges and received 18 months in federal prison, plus restitution payments that would keep her broke for years. Trent had fought the charges and lost spectacularly. The jury needed less than 2 hours to convict him on all counts. 25 years without possibility of parole. Detective Malley got 15 years. Laura Richter got 12. Kelly approached from the parking lot carrying 2 cups of coffee. How do you feel? Eric considered the question. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media interviews, and insurance settlements. His bank accounts had been restored. His reputation cleared. His life officially returned to him. But he wasn't the same man who'd come home from work that August evening to find his key didn't fit anymore. Different, Eric said finally. Harder, I guess. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Eric looked through the courthouse windows at the city beyond. Somewhere out there, other predators were targeting other victims, running similar schemes, destroying other lives. The FBI had shut down Trent's operation, but Kelly had shown Eric evidence of at least 3 similar networks operating in neighboring states. "What are you thinking?" Kelly asked. Eric smiled. "I'm thinking I might have found a new career?" Kelly raised an eyebrow. "Consulting? Investigation. The FBI offered me a job as a contractor working undercover to identify other schemes like Trent's. That's dangerous work. So is construction. At least this way I get to help people instead of just building things." Kelly sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "What about Dana?" Eric looked back at the courtroom where his ex-wife was being led away in handcuffs. He felt nothing for her anymore. No love, no hate, no regret. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. What about her? Do you think she learned anything? Eric thought about the letters Dana had sent from prison, full of apologies and explanations and requests for forgiveness. He'd read the first few, then started throwing them away unopened. "Some people never learn," Eric said. "They just get better at justifying their mistakes." Kelly nodded. "And some people use their mistakes to become stronger." Eric finished his coffee and tossed the cup in a trash can. "I need to get going. I start my new job Monday." "Where are they sending you?" "Phoenix. Similar scheme, different players. Guy named Barrett thinks he's untouchable because he's got connections in the mayor's office." Kelly laughed. "Barrett has no idea what's coming." Eric started toward his truck, then turned back. "Kelly, thank you for everything. Thank you for trusting me when you had no reason to." Eric drove away from the courthouse and didn't look back. In his rearview mirror, he could see Kelly walking toward her own car, already talking on her phone about their next case. 6 months later, Eric sat in a surveillance van outside a luxury hotel in Phoenix, watching Barrett's operation crumble in real time. The FBI had arrested 12 people, frozen 14 bank accounts, and recovered over $2 million in stolen assets. Barrett himself was in custody, still demanding to know how the FBI had identified him so quickly. Eric's handler, Agent Martinez, handed him a beer. "Another one down. How many does that make?" 4 networks in 6 months, 37 arrests, $8 million in recovered assets. Not bad for a construction worker. Eric smiled. Former construction worker? His phone buzzed. A text from Kelly, who was running a similar operation in Denver. "Just arrested the Johnson crew. 6 down, leader singing like a canary. Dinner when you get back?" Eric typed back, "Looking forward to it." Agent Martinez looked over Eric's shoulder at the text. "Personal or professional? With Kelly, there's not much difference." Eric's new life wasn't what he'd planned when he was married to Dana and building houses for a living, but it was meaningful in a way his old life had never been. Every criminal he helped catch, every victim he helped save, every scheme he helped unravel. It all felt like justice for what had been done to him, and justice, Eric had learned, was the best revenge of all. 2 years later, Eric was featured on the cover of FBI Quarterly for his work infiltrating criminal networks across 7 states. The article called him the most effective undercover contractor in bureau history. Dana saw the magazine while working in the prison library. She'd been released after 14 months for good behavior, but the restitution payments and felony conviction meant she was working minimum wage jobs and living in a studio apartment in a bad neighborhood. She cut out Eric's picture and kept it in her wallet, though she couldn't say why. Trent read about Eric's success in his cell at the federal penitentiary in Atlanta. He threw the magazine across the room and spent 3 days in solitary for destroying government property. Detective Malley was shanked in the prison yard by someone who didn't like corrupt cops. He survived, but barely. Laura Richter was released after serving 8 years of her 12-year sentence. She moved to a small town in Montana and got a job at a hardware store, using a fake name and hoping no one would recognize her. Eric didn't follow their fates closely, but information reached him through various channels. He felt no satisfaction in their suffering and no sympathy for their circumstances. They were simply consequences playing out in the background of his new life. 5 years after the night his key stopped working, Eric retired from undercover work and opened his own investigation firm with Kelly as his partner. Their specialty? Exposing financial predators who targeted vulnerable people. Their first case came from a woman whose elderly father had been bilked out of his life savings by a fake investment advisor. Their second involved a veteran who'd lost his disability benefits to an identity thief. Their third was a single mother whose ex-husband had hidden assets to avoid child support. Each case was different, but the pattern was always the same: predators targeting people who couldn't fight back. Eric and Kelly had gotten very good at evening those odds. On the anniversary of Dana's arrest, Eric drove past his old house for the first time since the investigation ended. The new owners had painted it yellow and installed a playground in the backyard. Children's voices drifted over the fence. Eric felt no nostalgia for the life he'd lost there. That man, the trusting husband who'd believed in fairness and playing by the rules, had died the night his key stopped working. The man who'd replaced him was harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous to those who preyed on the innocent. Eric's phone rang. Kelly. New case just came in. Tech executive in Seattle thinks his business partner is embezzling. Wants us to investigate. Eric started his truck. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Eric? Yeah? You ever miss the old days, when things were simpler? Eric thought about Dana laughing with Trent in their kitchen, about Detective Malley's threats, about waking up homeless and penniless while criminals spent his money. No, Eric said, I don't miss being a victim. He hung up and drove toward Kelly's office, toward their next case, toward another chance to turn the tables on predators who thought they were untouchable. Behind him, children played in the yard of his former house, protected by laws and systems that Eric now helped enforce from the shadows. The cycle continued, but Eric Landon was no longer at the mercy of other people's schemes. He'd become the scheme that other schemers feared. And that, Eric thought as he pulled into Kelly's parking lot, was exactly how it should be. In her prison cell that same evening, Dana wrote another letter she would never send. Dear Eric, I saw your picture in a magazine today. You look different, harder. I guess I deserve that. I guess we all got what we deserved in the end. I hope someday you can forgive me. I hope someday I can forgive myself. She folded the letter and put it with the others in a shoebox under her bunk. Outside her window, the sun was setting over the prison yard, casting long shadows between the buildings. In Phoenix, Trent stared at his cell wall and counted the days until his next parole hearing, 18 years and 4 months to go. In Montana, Laura closed the hardware store and walked to her car, checking over her shoulder for faces she hoped never to see again. And in Seattle, Eric Landon reviewed case files late into the night, preparing to hunt down another predator who thought he was too smart to get caught. The house that burned twice had become something new in the ashes, a fire that spread to consume those who played with matches. Some stories end with forgiveness, others end with justice. This one ended with both, measured out in exactly the proportions each character had earned.